right, you're listening to KX93.5, Laguna's Only FM. This is the Friendship Show, and that, of course, was Pipeline Sequence by the local iconic band Honk from the iconic surf movie 5 Summer Stories. And Don, you were saying what now?
Well, I learned this morning. This was the #1 song in Hawaii for how many months? Do you know?
It was months. It was at least 2 months.
Wow.
It could have been 3 months.
Wow.
It was kind of astounding. We didn't expect that. And I actually expected Love You Baby, another song that's on the soundtrack, to be the big hit. And over in Hawaii, they loved the raw sound of this fantastic instrumental that we used for this wonderful sequence about Jerry Lopez surfing Pipeline.
Nice.
We should introduce our guest, by the way. In the studio is veteran documentary film director, producer Greg MacGillivray, who has produced and directed such films as The Living Sea, Dolphins, To the Arctic, Everest, one of the highest grossing, if not the highest grossing IMAX theater films in history, by the way, and his newest film, Journey to the South Pacific. MacGillivray-Freeman Films has cumulatively earned more than $1 billion in ticket sales. Do I have that right, Greg?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's amazing. When you hear that, when you hear those numbers...
Well, the money, most of that money stays, 90% of that money stays at the museum theaters that we play at. And that's a good thing because, certainly I could make a lot more movies if I got it. But it helps the museums in the world, keep their doors open. It helps their curatorial staff members keep all the exhibits going and clean and ready to go, and helps them advertise to get more people through the doors to visit museums, to learn more about the way the world works.
Yeah,
I would say it definitely draws people to museums because when my son was young, that's what got us there. And then we were there all day. But we were there because there was a new IMAX film.
Yeah, and museums are the most trusted source of information. And these are in many, many polls, Gallup polls, that show more than the president, more than the Congress, more than your teacher, more than the library, museums are trusted. And one of the reasons for that is that they have to make good on that promise of education and really finding out the truth about stuff.
So we should probably back up just a little bit here and give some context to sort of one of the reasons you're in the studio today. We couldn't start this conversation without first mentioning the iconic surf movie 5 Summer Stories. Of course, we just heard the song Pipeline Sequence from this. We have a lot of young filmmakers in the community. How old were you when you made that movie? And ultimately, how much did you end up spending on that movie to create it?
Well, that movie was in a string of surfing films that I started when I was 13. Shooting with 16 millimeter film in high school, and then brought out my first commercial movie after 4 years of working on it in high school and then my freshman year at college at Santa Barbara. It was called A Cool Wave of Color, and I'd paid for that movie by throwing papers and mowing people's lawns and babysitting every kid in the neighborhood and any way that I could make money to buy film. And when it came out, it was surprisingly a big hit. And my parents and I and my sisters, my grandmother, we'd go to every screening, every show to collect tickets and sell tickets, and it was a family deal. But we never expected to make money. And when it broke even after about 10 screenings, we were kind of dumbfounded. And then it went on for another, 80 screenings. And so it actually tripled its money or quadrupled its money, and I found a career.
How old were you at the time?
I was 18 when it came out.
Wow.
And I was a freshman. It was in my second semester at Santa Barbara, and it was tough to actually make a movie and show the movie and go to school at the same time. But I figured out a way to do it.
How much did you spend on that movie? How much did you spend to create the movie?
That movie, the first movie, was $4,000.
Amazing.
All my money.
Yeah.
And
hard-earned money.
Greg, did you shoot that all on 16 millimeter?
All 16, yeah.
I have to ask, did you have to crank the camera up?
Yeah, you had to wind the camera.
That's awesome.
You had to wind the camera, and you only got 16 seconds of a run. And so you had to get, you had to plan ahead when you wanted to wind the camera.
Why was that so well received, do you think, by the viewing audience?
It was just really weird. It was the strangest surfing movie probably in the history of surfing films.
Why?
It was artful, lots of animation, lots of color filtering, scenes that were shot in negative film, slow motion, in the water camera work, which was sort of my specialty, and shots when I would surf and hold the camera, which was harder to do back then. It wasn't like now with the GoPro cameras and you can mount them anywhere.
Right.
These were big cameras, heavy cameras, and you had to figure out how to catch the wave and then stand up and pick the camera up and surf with it. But the film was different, and people wanted something really different and more creative. And even people like Bruce Brown, who just made The Endless Summer, was kind of blown away by it.
Yeah.
He just loved the photography and loved the originality of it. And so it became kind of a cult hit.
Definitely did. And the soundtrack, I think, helped as well.
Well, and then that I was talking about the first film.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Then Jim Freeman and I got together. He had actually just made a 3D surfing film, which was the most bizarre thing I'd ever seen in my life. The only 3D surfing film in the history of mankind. Hardest job in the world to try to do. The film really wasn't a very big success, but I saw something in his originality, and the two of us teamed together, and we made 4 or 5 surfing films after that together, culminating in 5 Summer Stories in 1972. So 8 years later, we finished our surfing career, bringing out what we thought was kind of an ode to surfing, a thank you note to surfing. And back to your question, we spent $72,000.
Oh, big budget increase.
Now, no one had ever spent that kind of money on a surfing film. About $30,000 of it was spent on the music and the music reproduction system that we would roll into every theater that we would play.
How funny.
And you would hear in those theaters the best sound of any movie at that particular moment in history. It was like a rock concert.
Yeah.
It was so loud and clear and bouncing off your chest with low notes, and the high notes were pristine and beautiful. And Honk and the Beach Boys were the 2 major musical contributors to the film. And of course, we played the pipeline sequence, which became a hit. But I fell in love with the Honk sound, and of course, I loved the Beach Boy sound, particularly their albums that had just come out right around 72, 73.
Yeah.
And so 5 Summer Stories became, next to The Endless Summer, the highest grossing surfing film.
What would you say, and I know guests typically hate this question, or this sort of question, but what would you say the impact of that film is on the film industry? 5 Summer Stories.
The thing that was interesting about that film relating to the entire film industry is that it showed how well slow motion could be used, and how taking the camera into the wave and on the wave with slow motion cameras, which were, again, gigantic and heavy, could really encapsulate and show the speed and the motion and the majesty and kind of the magic of riding a wave.
I'm going to make sort of an abrupt transition here because we got a lot to get through, and so
Sure.
I kind of have to not so smooth transition, so forgive me. But your partner at the time, Jim Freeman, ended up killed in a helicopter accident in 1976. You keep his name still on the masthead, and I've got to believe there's a reason for that and his influence on your filmmaking path. What was his influence ultimately on your filmmaking path?
Well, Jim and I, as I explained, we met. We were both so focused on surf photography initially, and then photography and filmmaking and studying and making better movies time and time again. We were focused on the art of film. We lived and breathed film 7 days a week. We didn't think about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And our girlfriends were the same way. They worked side by side with us. My wife Barbara was, and we started together in freshman year of high school. So, the
Corona Del Mar High School, by the way.
no, Newport Harbor.
Newport Harbor.
Yeah, yeah. Corona wasn't invented yet.
Wasn't around then. Yeah.
And so Jim and Barbara and I and Cindy were like 4 peas in a pod, and we went everywhere together, and we worked together 7 days a week trying to make better movies. And when you're that way with a friend and a business partner, you know, and you're shaping something that no one else has tried before. And one of the key things about our business was that every film and every challenge that we took on, people hadn't tried it before. And that's what kind of pushed us forward. No one had tried stereo sound with a 16 millimeter film before 5 Summer Stories. And we thought, okay, let's just try it. You know, we might fail, but, you know, it's more fun actually if you have that uncertainty in your life.
Yeah.
You know, and you get up in the morning and go, I can get this done. I can figure it out.
So his impact, would you say?
His impact, the fact that his artistry led to the fame that our company had experienced, particularly in the Hollywood realm, and just the fact that he was my best friend.
Yeah.
And, you know, people, after he had gotten killed in a helicopter crash, they asked me, well, what are you going to do? You're going to keep making films? And I wasn't certain if I could do it without Jim, because that relationship was just so strong and so much fun. But I also thought, well, I have to do it because he would want me to, and he would want to be there. You know, if the tables were turned and I was in the crash, he would carry on with my name, and I wanted to carry on with his name. And we just respected each other so highly that I wanted to do that. And it was strange. People said, well, why are you doing that? Mm-hmm. You know, Simpson Bruckheimer, when Simpson left, Bruckheimer went on with his own name. And, right. You know, there's a whole thing in the movie business where you just take as much credit as you can get.
Right.
And I thought, well, no, it's really, even though it's a long name on top of my long name, and so that's not good for branding. Your advertising people will say, get something short.
Right.
But anyway, I did it, and it's something that I really love, and I love thinking about Jim all the time.
Hi, I'm David Wilhelm, and this is Jimmy's Famous American Tavern. Jimmy's has been called a casual comeback for me. I think that's because most of the restaurants that I developed in the past were white tablecloth, upper-end restaurants. Jimmy's was designed as a place for friends and families to gather and enjoy regional American comfort food in a casual setting. Jimmy's Famous American Tavern. Simple and traditional.
Hey, so what advice would you give young filmmakers, people who want to come up through the ranks and would probably dream of less than 1% of the amount of money that your films have earned over the years? What advice would you give young filmmakers?
Well, you know, I think that the easy thing to say, but it's the most critical thing, is be original. You know, try to do something that someone has never done before. And that's hard,
yeah,
because there's so many people out there with small cameras today, iPhone cameras, making films on their iPads. But try to be original. And if you can then study kind of the art of photography through studying painting, composition, lighting, color, you know, and subject, you then can do things that are far more interesting.
Do you believe these are some of the tenets that has sustained your creativity and your business over all these years?
Yeah, our company never rests on its laurels. We always try to make the next film better than the previous films. So we invent new techniques, design new cameras, lenses, ways to get the audience involved through wonderful camera shots. We pioneered, you know, underwater photography and aerial photography and slow motion photography. And so every project, including the one that we're doing about humpback whales right now, and then the one that we're planning on national parks, every film we try to take another leap forward. And that, as I mentioned, the uncertainty factor of life, I think, is really a key. Don't do something that you're comfortable with.
Right.
Don't do something that you've done 10 times before. In fact, the reason that Jim and I got out of surfing films, and with 5 Summer Stories being our final one, was that we had done that. And we didn't, we had a huge audience that was waiting for the next film.
Right.
But, and the economic side of you and your advisors, and your parents and everything, oh, make another film, make 10 more films. But your heart is saying, no, I need better challenges. I need to try to push myself further so that every day when I wake up, I'm excited by the day. And I don't know what's going to be coming to me.
So how did you then transition from making surf movies into these giant screen films? How did that transition come about?
That was just such a stroke of luck, because Jim and I had done a number of films, him leading the way with Hollywood, where we took the camera into the air. We did Jonathan Livingston Seagull, the opening to Towering Inferno, a film called Sentinels of Silence that Jim shot in Mexico, and that received a couple Academy Awards. So we'd done these experimental camera films.
Jonathan Living Seagull by Richard Bach, the one about the wow.
Yeah, biggest book of the year.
Yeah, I remember.
And
I
a
interrupted.
beautiful movie.
Yeah, really.
The photography got an Academy Award nomination, as did the soundtrack by Neil Diamond.
Right.
And those kinds of credits allowed us to then become recognized around the world for our photography and our direction. And when the Air and Space Museum at the Smithsonian was being built in '94, they came to us and said, we want you to make this film about flying in this new format called IMAX. It's the biggest film format in the history of cinema. It's projected with the Rolls-Royce of projectors, a $2 million IMAX projector, onto a screen that's 5 stories high and 100 feet wide. The audience sits really close on steeply raked seats. Now, none of this had been seen before, including the steeply raked seats. And people, when they walked into that theater, when the film opened in July '76, were blown away by both the environment, the fact that they were on steeply raked, kind of stadium seating, which you feel like you're going to teeter and fall into the seat below you. Mm-hmm. And then when you sit down, but you have that completely unobscured view. There's no head in front of you. You see the screen, and the entire screen fills your peripheral vision, top to bottom, side to side. And so you're in the movie. And so when we did that film, it kind of created this sensation towards IMAX. And that was the 4th theater built for the IMAX Corporation. Now they have 800 theaters. In about 3 years, they'll have 1,000 theaters worldwide. They're at the top of their business right now. And so it's really wonderful to be partnering with them on many films and continuing in this IMAX format.
You're a lot more animated standing up, by the way, than you are sitting down. Your body's, listeners can't see, but viewers will be able to see. You move your arms now, you're motioning, you got a rhythm going on. We should mention the movie, by the way, the film that's just coming out called Journey to the South Pacific. Yeah. Based on what I read, it's about a young island boy who discovers the incredible diversity of life in the ocean around his home, and who ultimately ends up educating others about the importance of the healthy marine resources, narrated by Kate Blanchett?
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce it? Why exactly this film, and what is it about this film that the narrative ends up telling?
Yeah. Well, it's an important film to me because its major objective is to show how marine protected areas, like the one we have off our blue belt here in Laguna Beach, do work, how they bring back the health of the ocean in the communities where they're observed. And in West Papua, New Guinea, this area of Indonesia, they have a huge, about 8 tracts of sea that have been set aside as no-take zones. They're patrolled by patrol boats so that outsiders can't come in and try to steal the good fish. And it has brought back the life of the reef and of all those sea creatures that the fishermen have depleted, and now they can start to fish them again. And so, you know, we've learned through science so many things, particularly about oceans, and we have done a lot of things wrong that we can now do right. And by creating marine protected areas like the one we have here off Laguna, which is 6 miles long and at its deepest point 3 miles out, it's a big triangle. You know, you in that area, and of course the lobster trappers didn't like it because they couldn't trap, but now they're trapping right outside the line and they're getting bigger lobsters than ever. And the same thing is true with the fishing boats. All the fishing boats from Dana Point and Newport that come down to Laguna because we've got, you know, this marine protected area now. The overflow into the areas that are nearby, they're catching bigger fish. Yeah. And when Barbara and I stand up paddle and swim down at Thalia Street, you're now seeing the big schools that I haven't seen in 40 years. I've lived at the same place in Laguna for 40 years. Every day during the summer, I'm in the water, swimming it. And over that 40 years, we depleted the ocean life by about 95%.
Yeah. You started at a film that you made for $4,000. You moved over to a film, 5 Summer Stories, for I think you said $72,000.
And 3 cents.
And 3 cents. The films you're creating these days, what's the budget look like for the films you're creating these days?
They're all in the $8 to $10 million range, plus their marketing budget, which might be another $5 million. And it's a nice thing. A good example of these partners that we have, Pacific Life, who has the humpback whale as their logo, is our partner, 50-50 partner on this IMAX film, because they want, in a very positive way, to get across the message of humpbacks and how that is an amazing comeback story, probably the biggest comeback story in the history of the ocean. But the story has not ended yet. We still have a lot of work to do to keep humpbacks safe.
You talk about partnerships. This is the first film, The Journey to South Pacific, to be released under the multi-picture partnership with IMAX. What's that partnership look like, and what's sort of the near future for projects coming out through that partnership?
Well, of course, IMAX is, like I said, developing theaters all over the world. They'll have 200 to 300 theaters in China within a couple of years. Right now there's 175 or something like that. And that's a very important market for our conservation films because Chinese want to know more stuff about the world. They've been kind of sequestered by their government. They're really eager to have knowledge. And the IMAX theaters are wanted in every community there for that reason. They want the educational component and the Hollywood component for film programming. And the relationship that we have with IMAX is a really positive one, particularly as all of cinema makes a big transition from film, which we've been in for 125 years, to digital. And well, digital doesn't match IMAX film yet, but it will in about 3 years. And IMAX is developing what I consider to be the best quality digital projector, which will be a laser lamped housed projector using lasers. This is really high tech, whiz-bang stuff. They haven't perfected yet, but they will. And it'll give you an image on the screen that will be unbelievably great.
You're on the cutting edge of that technology then.
Oh yeah, you've got to be.
Yeah.
You know, we right now have 4 of the best digital cameras. They're called Red Epic cameras, and they're not inexpensive, but they shoot pretty good images, but they're not IMAX 1570 yet.
When you're shooting, Greg, do you strap on a camera and get in the water these days? Or
Yeah.
You do?
I do. I don't. I do all the ground shooting and the topside shooting. I get other people to do the aerial shooting and the specialized underwater shooting. Howard Hall particularly, and DJ Roller, who lives here in Laguna. Those kinds of people I rely on because they're better underwater than I am. But yeah, I love shooting.
You know, we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left, so I'm going to have to rush through this last round of questions here, if you bear with me for a moment here. In 2011, you launched a 10-year global initiative called One World, One Ocean, that includes these various documentaries and films we were talking about with IMAX, all designed to kind of reshape the way we think about the ocean and to inspire change. This must be, it sounds to me, based on everything you've talked about in the last hour, something very close to your heart, no?
Yeah, Barbara and I have taken our savings and poured it into this effort, and so far it's working. Mm-hmm. We're getting people to respond to our messaging.
And what is the messaging, or maybe more importantly, what is the goal of the project?
There's 3 main goals, which is number 1, use less plastic. Mm-hmm. Number 2, eat your seafood more consciously, more carefully. Go to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, watch. Don't eat orange roughy and Chilean sea bass and swordfish and those kinds of fishes that are well depleted, and we're catching the last ones. And 3, build more marine protected areas.
You know, and one of the principal advisors of the project, Dr. Sylvia Earle, has suggested there's a sense of urgency to these particular efforts you're talking about here, because she says the next 10 years will determine the next 10,000 years.
Yeah, and I think that the key there is, and that's a truthful thing, we're really at a tipping point. And what Laguna Beach has done bravely by creating the marine protected area here is leading edge. And we will then show to the rest of the world how successful this can be.
Last question, and I'm looking at several things here, so forgive me, I'm not sure. How can creativity and filmmaking, and in specific maybe your projects through One World, One Ocean, help bring about these positive changes we're talking about?
I think films are the most powerful medium of convincing people to do something, to see the value of something. And this has been proven over and over and over. And we are able to get presidents and prime ministers to our films because they're located in these wonderful museum settings. And once they see films like ours, they'll go, I want to do that. I want to change things.
www.oneworldoneocean.com. People can learn more about these projects at www.oneworldoneocean.com. And thank you so much for coming in. That was a fascinating hour that went way too quickly.